Welcome to Queer Theology. This is your pastor, online pastor, Pastor Arthur, and we welcome you to enjoy from another teaching from Queer Theology. And I hope you're all doing fine from the last recording. And today we want to focus on Daniel, the queer prophet. And we're going to do a series of this Daniel, the queer prophet. And Daniel, the queer prophet, why was Daniel the queer prophet? Why do we call him Daniel, the queer prophet? Well, we call him the queer prophet because he was a eunuch. And a eunuch is a very interesting man. And do you know who a eunuch is? We are going to read from Merriam-Webster what a eunuch is. A eunuch is a man who has had his sexual organs removed. He's a castrated man placed in charge of a harem, employed as a chamberlain in a palace. And he's a man or boy deprived of the testes or external genitals. One that lacks virility or power. Political eunuchs. And the origin of the word is from Latin is eunuchus, and from Greek is eunuchos or eunuchos, from eun, meaning bed, eune is bed, and echein is to have, so to have charge of the bed. And the English version of the word came about in the 15th century. But eunuchus, because Greek is older than English, it has been in use for a long time, and so is Latin older than English. And Hebrew, which is the language that the Bible uses, is older than Latin and Greek. So all of these, that's why the Hebrew word for eunuch is not eunuch, is sarisaris. And we get this from the Hebrew Bible. Now, we have got to know what a eunuch is. He is a castrated person. And why do we call such a person queer? We call them queer because, number one, they do not have, there are different types of eunuchs, and we won't do that now. We will talk about this later on. There are different types of eunuchs. There are those whose external organs are removed. There are those who their external organs can remain, but they lose the stones, the testosterone power. They can be crushed. Others would chop them off. Others would just crush the balls and to kill off the testosterone power. Others are born with low testosterone. They are naturally born with low testosterone. And then you also have children, sometimes the testes don't descend, and they kind of rectify. These days with medicine you can rectify those things. But in the past, queer children, especially the eunuchs who were born and the intersex, were killed because they were not understood by the people in the society. And that's what happens to some children. But those who survive, they actually naturally become eunuchs. They are more feminine. Sometimes they're very more feminine than they are masculine. Because when you have low testosterone, it means you have low virility or low power. And virility, what do you mean by virility? Virile is the ability to reproduce. It doesn't necessarily mean not having libido. It just means you can't produce sperm that will lead to reproduction. And when you look at the word eunuch just means bed chamberlain. It just means bodyguard. It just means bed guard, a guy who protects a bed. So why did old kingdoms hire eunuchs? And I think they still do. I haven't been watching, but I think they do so. but they don't necessarily castrate them. These days, you can have a security, an alarm system. So they used to hire these guys to protect their wives, the wives of the king, from anybody sleeping with them, because the king, succession was one of the most important things in a kingdom. So you had to protect your people. You had to protect the succession line, the bloodline of the royal family, with eunuchs who were bodyguards. And it was to protect the woman from sleeping around with men who would kind of disrupt the succession line by introducing another seed that is not of the king. And this seed becomes an heir of the kingdom. And then sometimes a story comes up and says, hey, guess what? I slept with Queen Bernice, and that kid that is going to take over the kingdom is mine. And the king says, are you sure? That cannot be. And he says, yes, it is. Go and ask Bernice whom she slept with. And that was enough to kill the person. You see, even if you remember the story of David, David killed Uriah. Why? Because Bathsheba was pregnant after sleeping with David. And David could not allow, David wanted to cover up what had happened. He didn't want Uriah to know that Bathsheba had slept with him. And secondly, Uriah surviving would say that if that baby is born, he belongs to Uriah. So that whole confusion, to kill it off, he killed him, which was not advisable, but he did it anyway. And so that's why kings hire eunuchs. They hire them so that they protect their wives from having children from other men. And secondly, they hire eunuchs for other issues, bodyguards. And as we've said, even sometimes you can get sex from a eunuch. You can do, but the gay sex and all of this, kings had, because sex is not only reproductive, it's also pleasurable. Now, let's go on, because the queen, if we're going to read from the Bible, and you'll see queens used to have their female bodyguards, the maids, like Queen Esther. And who knows, you can have a lesbian relationship in that setting. You see, there are many things that happen because the ladies used to bathe the queen. Sometimes the queen would not want to bathe herself. She's so dainty and says, could you please come and bathe me? And it's the ladies who would do that for her. And the eunuchs had to protect the woman, so they can see a naked woman, but they don't have any issue seeing a naked woman or standing next to her, because they were protection. Why? Because they were already castrated. They were just like women. They become effeminate. They're feminine. They don't have the virility to cause generation. So basically, that's who a eunuch is. And Daniel was a eunuch. We get this from Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 1, where he says, surprisingly, Daniel is the one who wrote the book, it's said. So we're going to see, as we go through this series, we're going to have a very interesting story of a man who is busy praising himself. So Daniel chapter 1, verse 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in all knowledge, and understanding science, and as such as had ability to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So Ashpenaz was the master of eunuchs, and the king wanted new eunuchs, and he wanted eunuchs from the children of Israel. So he called up Ashpenaz to get for him children whom had no blemish. Of course, this is the King James Version of the Bible. So there was no word for adolescent. An adolescent was still called a child. So basically, he wanted to have these guys to be eunuchs. So you can see, you can castrate even a child. You can castrate even an adult. You can castrate any male that exists. And some males are born castrated. They don't have a lot of testosterone, or they have none. Now, so what is the word eunuch in Hebrew? The word eunuch in Hebrew is saris saris, and this means a valet, especially of the female apartments, and thus a minister of state, a chamberlain, eunuch, or officer. Now, this is what of course, we get this from Strong's Concordance, and we find that the word used, Hebrew can have very many words for one word in English. So this is just one meaning of the word eunuch. Some other Bibles, there are some other portions of the Bible that don't use the word saris saris, but we will go to use the word saris saris. Now, let's go on. Let's now look at the kingdoms that had eunuchs. There are very many kingdoms that had eunuchs. They were the kingdom of Egypt, and this is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 37, whereby Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and a captain of the guard. So the word officer is the word eunuch, saris saris. So what do we see? That Pharaoh's top men, captains of the guard, were actually castrated men. They were actually castrated men. They were men who had no, they had low testosterone or even no testosterone, depending on how they were castrated or their nature of their castration. And then also you find the chief of the butlers and the chief of the bakers were also saris saris in Genesis chapter 40. So the kingdom of Egypt had a eunuch system. Another kingdom that had a eunuch system was Israel. And this was prophesied by Samuel when Israel wanted a monarch. Samuel said, "And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and his servants." The word officers is saris saris, again, eunuchs. So what do you see? You see the prophet Samuel was prophesying to Israel that if you start a monarchy, you will have a king that will take from you. That's the taxation through a tenth, because tithing used to happen, but it was for the priest. But now there's going to be another tenth from the king, and he'll give his saris saris, his eunuchs. So the kingdom, what we find, the kingdom of Israel also has eunuchs. And the king of Israel, the kingdoms of Israel, they of course copied from the other kingdoms that were around. The kingdom of Egypt, the Philistines, and the Syrians, the neighbors around. These already had kingdoms, so they all copied from them, even most of these kingdoms. Then we go to the book of Esther, whereby it says in Esther chapter 1 verse 10, "On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abgatha, and Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king." The word chamberlain is also saris saris. These are eunuchs. And as I've told you, a eunuch was a bodyguard of the bedroom of the king. And he also used to stand in the presence of the king. And they were castrated men. And that's what a eunuch is. Now, how do we know a eunuch is a castrated man? When you go to the book of Isaiah, it says, in Isaiah 56 verse 3,